In stark contrast to Leo's easygoing manner, Caleb's expression was anything but friendly. It was as if the exhaust from a passing city bus had coated his features in a layer of grime, a chill seeping out from deep within him. The traffic light at the corner of Bleecker and McDougal bled from green to red. Julian and Leo stood at the entrance of the small Italian bistro, watching the man across the street turn to issue a few final words to his suited subordinates. He dismissed them without a backward glance and strode directly through the crosswalk. As he approached them, the ghost of Julian's radiant smile from a moment before flashed in his mind, and a surge of formless frustration tightened his chest. His gaze completely bypassed the younger man beside Julian, landing instead on the goofy Alaskan Malamute wagging its tail by Julian's feet. A frigid question cut through the air, aimed squarely at Julian. He demanded to know who, exactly, had given him permission to take his dog out without asking. Julian's lips pressed together, his fine features softening as his eyes lowered in a gesture of immediate capitulation. He offered a quiet apology. The words disarmed Caleb, leaving him speechless, yet the sight of Julian's submissive posture only stoked the fire of his irritation. The only coherent thought that surfaced was the primal urge to drag him home and pin him to the bed for a thorough lesson. Leo's eyes shifted between the two men before he suddenly spoke, his voice directed at Caleb. He inquired if Mr. Thorne remembered him. Caleb's train of thought shattered. He managed a slight, almost imperceptible frown, asking who he was. Leo's tone was respectful as he explained that he was a student of Professor Albright. Caleb shot him a brief, dismissive glance and gave a curt nod, his face a mask of cool indifference. Leo's focus shifted, a thoughtful look passing over his face as he took in the large dog now leaning affectionately against Julian's leg. He smiled at Julian, using the old nickname they'd coined as kids while wrestling on a living room rug. He asked if Jaybird knew Mr. Thorne as well. Julian threw him a subtle look, but in Caleb's presence, he maintained a composed facade and nodded. He even joked that Mr. Thorne had hired him as a dog walker. Leo chatted with him for a few more minutes before making his excuses, citing an evening engagement, and departed without renewing his offer to drive Julian home. It was only when Leo's silhouette had completely vanished down the street that Caleb turned to Julian, a sneer curling his lip. He remarked on how wonderfully idle Julian's life seemed to be, having dinner with a top influencer one day and a Columbia grad student the next. Julian squinted against the gentle evening breeze of early spring, a faint trace of amusement in his voice. He noted that even though his own college career had been a disaster, he was still allowed to have friends who went to prestigious universities. Caleb's face darkened, and he accused Julian of thinking him a fool. He questioned whether friends typically went on dates to intimate candlelit bistros designed for couples. Julian looked up at Caleb's handsome, stormy face and blinked once. His voice was soft and slow, a tone that could be mistaken for either a fond complaint or a simple statement of fact. It landed like a snowflake, light and cool on the heart, slowly melting and seeping into its deepest chambers. He said it was only because Caleb himself was never willing to bring him to a place like this. After a pause, with a voice that was equal parts genuine and teasing, he added that in his entire life, he'd never actually had a meal in a restaurant like that. Caleb's expression flickered with surprise, but he quickly recovered, letting out a short, sharp laugh. He questioned whether Julian's ex-boyfriend had never taken him to one. Julian shook his head, a gesture of both resignation and mock helplessness, and sighed lightly. He explained that it was hard, given how broke the guy was. The man watched him with a strange, complicated look. Under his intense gaze, Julian's lips curved into a smile, his eyes crinkling. He raised his hands in a gesture of surrender and confessed that he was kidding. He clarified that Leo was a blind date his father had set up, and that Leo had been the one to choose the restaurant. Having told the truth, he watched as Caleb's expression grew even more thunderous. Caleb's eyes narrowed in profound displeasure, and he asked Julian how many of his words were ever actually true. Julian was taken aback for a second. He opened his mouth, but before he could form a sound, Caleb cut him off impatiently, his voice low and laced with a barely concealed fury. He wanted to know if it was common for a first date to use a childhood nickname. Julian explained that Jaybird wasn't really his nickname. Caleb's laugh was devoid of humor, his eyes fixing on Julian like a predator watching its struggling prey. He pointed out the obvious intimacy of such a name, questioning what else it could possibly be. Julian didn't argue further. He crouched down, stroking the head of the quiet dog who was looking around curiously. Then he looked up, his dark eyes locked on Caleb's, and asked unexpectedly how he knew his real nickname. Caleb glanced down, his face unreadable. He asked why he shouldn't know. As if weighing each word, Julian spoke slowly, expressing his simple curiosity about how Caleb had found out. A flicker of something unreadable crossed Caleb's gaze before vanishing into the amber depths of his eyes. The man's expression remained unchanged as he stated curtly that Shane had told him. Julian rested his chin on his hand and smiled, remarking on Caleb's good memory. His answer was a large hand clamping onto the back of his collar, pulling him upward and forcing him to release his grip on the dog's neck. Caleb hauled him closer, his displeasure palpable as he reminded Julian not to think that changing the subject would make him forget tonight's transgression. Julian met Caleb's cool, amber stare and asked what transgression he was talking about. He then seemed to consider it himself. If Caleb was referring to the blind date, he began, his lips pursed. His eyes were as clear and placid as a pool of still water, projecting an image of pure, guileless innocence. He reasoned that it could hardly be considered a betrayal. He only had to refrain from sleeping with other people while their arrangement as bed partners was active. As Caleb himself had said, they were not in a relationship. Therefore, tonight's dinner fell outside the scope of their verbal agreement. As he spoke, Julian was uncomfortably reminded of his high school days on the debate team, standing on a stage and weaving together classical allusions and clever sophistry to leave his opponents speechless. Now, standing on a busy city street, facing the handsome, glowering man whose expression was steadily icing over, he felt none of the exhilaration or triumph of his debating days. There was only a hyper-awareness of the other man's mood and a reckless impulse, the culmination of weeks of cautious interaction and testing boundaries. It was like pushing a mountain of chips to the center of the table for the final hand of a high-stakes poker game. He was a gambler betting it all, closing his eyes and throwing another log on the fire, with no idea if it would erupt into a roaring blaze or extinguish into a pile of cold, dead ash. His face remained calm, but his eyes were bright and intense, seemingly oblivious to the sharp, cold stare fixed upon him. He added that refraining from sleeping with others was a rule Caleb had unilaterally imposed. He had only complied because he liked him. If he were to stop liking him, then such a verbal agreement would mean nothing at all. Real life, however, rarely conforms to one's desires. The conversation on the street that night ended with Caleb's mocking question, asking if Julian was threatening him. Caleb took the leash of the Alaskan Malamute from Julian's hand and walked away without looking back, his stride almost casual. But his outward nonchalance was a lie. Once in the parking garage, he violently yanked open the back door of his SUV and shoved the dog, who was still looking back wistfully, into the back seat. He slammed the door shut and, with a dark expression, kicked the tire, a burst of frustration he didn't realize was a direct result of Julian's words striking a nerve. He slid into the driver's seat, fuming, and opened the center console, intending to put on some calming music. Instead, his eyes fell on a collection of indie rock CDs Julian had brought weeks ago. With a muttered curse, he snatched them out and tossed them into the glove compartment. He rummaged frantically for a classical violin CD but found only more of Julian's recent pop music acquisitions at the bottom of the box. He paused, finally remembering that he hadn't listened to instrumental music in years. Julian's provocations had nearly scrambled his memory. Caleb clenched his jaw, suppressing his anger, and started the car with a blank face, driving out of the city center and heading straight for the exclusive gated community in the hills east of town. At 9 o'clock, he led the Alaskan Malamute into his family's villa. It was a weekend, and his stepbrother, Sam, was home from college, sitting with the housekeeper in the living room watching the latest hit reality talent show. Caleb handed the dog's leash to the housekeeper, then tossed a paper bag into Sam's lap before turning to head upstairs. Sam could tell Caleb was in a foul mood and had no intention of provoking him, happily clutching his new sneakers. But when he opened the bag and saw a small gift box next to the shoebox, he froze. On impulse, he called out to his brother. Caleb turned back impatiently, a storm brewing on his face. Sam immediately dropped his playful demeanor, holding up the gift box and asking tentatively if he had forgotten his cufflinks. He didn't know which of his words had triggered a landmine, but instead of calming Caleb, it made his gaze even more menacing. Sam instinctively flinched but forced himself to ask if they weren't his. Caleb stared at him for a long moment, his Adam's apple bobbing, before a cold smile touched his lips. He said they were his, but now they were a gift. For several days, the oppressive atmosphere around Caleb did not dissipate. Everyone in the company walked on eggshells, terrified of accidentally setting off their boss. Caleb had initially blamed his foul mood on Julian's face and his sharp tongue. But as another week wore on, he realized the agitation in his heart hadn't subsided in the slightest. He was irritable and couldn't pinpoint the source of his anger, which made him even more unpredictable. That Thursday night, the CEO of a long-term partner company hosted a poker game at an upscale private club. Caleb accepted the invitation but sat at the bar, listlessly smoking, his interest elsewhere. He narrowed his eyes, finally grasping the source of his frustration. The way he was treating Julian wasn't how one should treat a casual partner. If his own displays of intimacy had given Julian the wrong impression, leading him to say those ridiculous things on the street, then he had no problem setting him straight once and for all. Caleb removed the cigarette from his lips, exhaling a perfect ring of smoke. Through the haze, he lowered his gaze and coolly opened his messaging app. 30 seconds later, across town, Julian, who was sitting opposite his friend Alex, received the first text from Caleb since their unpleasant parting. It read, "Come over tonight or this is over. You don't have to come again." Julian was silent for a long moment, then raised his head with a self-deprecating smile, murmuring that he'd gone all in and lost. Alex was confused. Julian explained with a faint smile that he'd been impulsive and impatient, ruining a perfectly good hand and losing all his chips in the process. Alex looked astonished, asking when he had started gambling. Julian turned his face away, offering only a cryptic smile. Alex was speechless, wondering how he could still smile after losing everything. Just then, a car passed by outside, its bright headlights sweeping across the window and illuminating Julian's face. Alex's voice trailed off. He could clearly see that the smile didn't reach Julian's desolate eyes. Julian went to Caleb's apartment as requested. Caleb was waiting for him in the entryway, a cigarette dangling from his lips. The look he gave Julian was identical to the one he'd given him on their first meeting. As Julian stepped out of the elevator, Caleb turned and extinguished the smoldering cigarette in an ashtray on the shoe cabinet. His voice was flat as he stated that if Julian wanted to maintain their previous arrangement, then he could pretend he hadn't heard what was said that night. Objectively speaking, Julian was the pursuer and Caleb the pursued, which implied an unequal dynamic. From the beginning, Caleb had held the dominant position in this relationship, and Julian was expected to be passive and show a certain degree of obedience. At least for now. Julian had never been a sore loser. He nodded without a change in expression, agreeing to the terms. Caleb lowered his gaze and studied him for a moment, as if judging the sincerity of his words, or perhaps taken aback by his ready compliance. After a moment, he stepped back, nodding slightly to indicate that he should come in. Julian noticed a subtle shift in the man's behavior. While he showered in the bathroom, Caleb sat in his study, engrossed in his work. When Julian emerged, wrapped in a bathrobe, and knocked on the study door. Caleb didn't even turn his head, instructing him in a businesslike tone to wait in the bedroom. As Julian walked away, he passed the seldom-used guest room and glanced inside. He saw a fresh, clean sheet and a neatly folded duvet on the new mattress. 5 minutes later, Caleb sauntered in, shed his own robe, and pushed Julian into the bed before kissing him. Their lovemaking was as passionate and perfectly matched as ever, a whirlwind of tangled limbs and lost time. They didn't stop until the middle of the night. Caleb leaned over to pick up a fallen robe from the floor and hand it to him, about to say something, when Julian simply got out of bed and walked to the bathroom. A moment later, the sound of the shower started. Caleb sat on the bed, his gaze fixed on the closed, frosted glass door at the far end of the bedroom, his brow deeply furrowed. When Julian came out of the shower, he turned to pick up his clothes from the back of a chair. Caleb glanced at him, noting that he hadn't eaten dinner yet. Julian replied that he had. Caleb's gaze lingered on the small of Julian's back, now covered by his shirt, before he asked with a sneer where he was going so late. He reminded him that even if he didn't sleep, the security guard at the gate did. Julian, who was now fully dressed, turned to face him, his expression perfectly natural as he met Caleb's eyes. He said he was going home. Caleb's movement to pull back the covers froze, his hand unconsciously tightening on the duvet, though he himself seemed unaware of it. He asked in a low voice how Julian planned to get home at midnight. Julian bent down to pick up his phone from the nightstand, his tone utterly casual as he replied that he would call a cab. Caleb's gaze sharpened, his face a picture of calm before a storm. After a long pause, a humorless smile spread across his lips. He asked if Julian was testing him, if he hadn't understood his terms. He had agreed to sleep with him, he clarified coldly, but he had never agreed to be in a relationship with him. Just as you said, Julian picked up where he left off. Since you don't want to be in a relationship with me, then we shouldn't sleep in the same bed like a couple living together. He walked to the edge of the bed, placed one knee on the soft mattress, and rested a hand lightly on Caleb's shoulder. He tilted his head, his movements fluid and natural, and pressed a kiss to the beautiful blue whale tattoo on Caleb's back. "Mr. Thorne," he said, "from this moment on, you get your wish." Julian stood up and stepped back, offering the man sitting on the bed a small, subtle smile. He promised softly that because he liked him, he would abide by his decision. Starting today, he trailed off, his gaze dropping as he walked toward the bedroom door. "We won't talk about love, we'll just make it." There was no sound from behind him. Julian walked slowly, his own breathing slowing to match the silence, but his heart was pounding like a drum. As he passed a long dressing mirror, he held his breath and raised his eyes. In the reflection, Caleb's back was rigid, as if he'd been struck from behind with a club, his expression ghastly. Julian's tense shoulders relaxed imperceptibly. No matter how badly he'd played his hand, there was always a chance to turn the tables. As for the cab fare, he'd just bill Caleb for it later. Caleb still believed Julian was bluffing. That night, he held him down on the bed with force. Afterwards, he leaned back against the headboard nonchalantly, watching from the corner of his eye as Julian showered and left on his own. He scrutinized Julian's face, like a critical parent searching for flaws in a worthless child, not missing the slightest change in his expression, just waiting for him to lose his composure. However, Julian was far more resilient than he had anticipated. It's usually difficult for people to go from luxury to austerity, but Julian never once complained or mentioned asking Caleb to drive him home. He did, however, unfailingly send a text message upon arriving home in the middle of the night, regardless of whether Caleb replied. One evening, passing the guest room, he noticed that it was once again bare except for the mattress and asked with feigned curiosity if Caleb's friend who had stayed over a few days ago had left. His question earned him a cold glare and a sharp rebuke to stop snooping. Julian came over, took off his shoes, and got into bed. But he didn't lie down immediately, nor did he sit on Caleb's lap. Instead, he leaned against the headboard and started playing on his phone. Caleb glanced up and prompted him. Julian responded with a non-committal hum, his eyes glued to the screen as if mesmerized. Tired of talking, Caleb simply reached out and plucked the phone from his hands. He glanced at the screen. A wanted poster issued by the city police was displayed prominently. The man's thumb, poised over the lock button, hesitated as he involuntarily read the post's contents more closely. Julian leaned in, his chin resting naturally on Caleb's solid shoulder, and added that it was likely related to the homicide in the downtown shopping district a few days ago. The killer was still at large. Unmoved, Caleb pushed his face away, him to remember what he'd said and not to engage in such cloying gestures. He tossed Julian's phone onto the nightstand, turned off the bedroom lights, and in the soft moonlight filtering through the curtains, began to expertly undress him. Julian was fully cooperative, his hands moving to the man's chest and abdomen. Soon, the soft creak of the bed and low gasps filled the darkness, their intertwined shadows dancing on the wall. At 11:30, Julian left Caleb's apartment on schedule. As the sound of the front door closing echoed through the quiet, Caleb opened the nightstand drawer, found his lighter and a pack of cigarettes, and lit one. He then went into his study, sat down, and opened his still-running laptop to browse through work reports sent by his subordinates. It wasn't that he needed to work overtime after sleeping with Julian. At least a week ago, after they were finished, they would simply pull up the covers and go to sleep. But ever since Julian had stopped staying the night and insisted on texting him upon his return home, Caleb had, without realizing it, developed the habit of working for an hour after he left. Even he found this behavior inexplicable. Tonight, however, time seemed to be crawling by. The ashtray was nearly overflowing with twice the usual number of cigarette butts, but his phone, lying at the edge of his vision, remained silent. Caleb's patience finally wore out. He grabbed the phone, which was lying face down, and his gaze froze on the bold, enlarged time on the lock screen. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. That was a full 30 minutes later than he had received the text the previous night. Yet there was no notification of an unread message. He instinctively looked at his computer, minimizing the full-screen document to check the time in the bottom right corner. It was also 1 o'clock. The image of the wanted poster on Julian's phone flashed in his mind. His fingers twitched as he opened his text messages. The little red dot indicating an unread message was there, hovering mockingly next to Julian's name. The tense line of his jaw relaxed slightly. He opened the unread message, only to frown deeply when he saw the date. It was from the previous morning. The man shot to his feet, the swivel chair scraping loudly against the floor. Caleb collected himself, put down the phone with a blank expression, and went into the bathroom. He turned on the faucet and splashed cold water on his face. Then, he lifted his chin and glanced at his reflection. The man in the mirror stared back, his handsome, amber eyes devoid of any emotion. Caleb squeezed some shaving cream onto his hand, lathered it on his chin, and turned on his electric razor. He absently guided it along his jawline. Halfway through, he abruptly shut his eyes, turned off the razor, and tossed it into the sink. He grabbed a towel from the rack and forcefully wiped the cream off his face. He strode back into the study, picked up his phone, and dialed Julian's number. The phone rang exactly 12 times before the call ended. No one answered. He tried 3 times, all with the same result. His jaw tightened, his face grim as he stared at the call log. He went back to the master bedroom, grabbed the clothes he'd changed out of before his shower, threw them on, snatched his car keys from the cabinet, and walked out the door. He was already halfway down the block before he realized he didn't know Julian's exact address. As he strode past the brightly lit security booth, he was pulling up Marcus's number when a voice came from his side, asking where he was going. Caleb stopped dead in his tracks, ending the call. He whipped his head around, staring silently at the person standing a few feet away holding a takeout container. His lips were pressed into a thin, hard line. Julian was taken aback by his intense gaze. He placed the takeout on the windowsill of the security booth and repeated his question about where Caleb was going so late. Caleb's chest heaved as he demanded to know if Julian didn't know. He closed the distance between them in a single stride, roughly plunging his hand into Julian's pocket and pulling out his phone. He pointed to the silent mode icon and the 3 missed calls, his eyes sharp as he asked again if Julian truly didn't know where he was going. Julian's lips thinned. He turned his head to look at Caleb, asking if he was going to find him. Caleb didn't answer. Julian watched him intently, questioning why he would go looking for him. Was it because he was worried? But why would he be worried? Was it because every other night he had sent a message to say he was safe, but tonight he hadn't? Julian took a step forward, his expression calm and composed, but his gaze was so clear it seemed to bore straight into the depths of the other man's amber eyes. "But you never reply to my texts," he said. "You never even open them, do you?" Caleb's lips curved into a sneer, avoiding the question. He accused Julian of setting him up. The man grabbed his collar, his face contorted with anger. He warned Julian not to push his limits again and again. Julian denied that he had. If it wasn't for Caleb constantly lowering his own boundaries, he countered, his brow furrowing slightly. Yet, a spark of defiance, as if emboldened by the challenge, lit up in his eyes. How else would he have had a second, or even a third, opportunity to test those limits? "People get spoiled, Caleb," he said, the light in his eyes coalescing. "But if you hadn't spoiled me, I wouldn't have become so greedy." The man's pupils contracted. He stared at Julian, his face unreadable, a silent refusal to engage that was a rare admission of defeat. Julian tilted his head up slightly, his expression soft and harmless, but his words struck with surgical precision. "So, that night, were you angry because I took your dog without permission? Or because I was having dinner with someone else in a romantic restaurant?" The man's Adam's apple bobbed. His voice was thick with a mixture of anger and hoarseness as he reminded Julian that he'd already addressed that, asking if he had no memory. Julian lowered his gaze, feigning the obedience of a child being scolded, but his words were still a rebuttal. He said that Caleb's explanations had zero credibility. His own dog was more excited to see him than to see Caleb. Besides, it was obvious Caleb didn't even like dogs that much. As if trying to hide his own desperate and anxious hope, Julian's lips spread into a smile, his face openly expectant. "Do you really feel nothing for me?" he asked. Caleb's expression froze. Julian's gaze held a strange power, pulling him into those dark eyes that could only be described as pools of starlight. He couldn't look away, couldn't even summon the dismissive or sarcastic remarks that usually came so easily. The air grew still, so quiet he could almost hear the ticking of a clock. Sweat beaded on Julian's palms as his heart sank. After what felt like an eternity, he forced a smile and was the first to look away, his hopeful expression vanishing as if it had never been there. But the sight of Julian's now neutral eyes struck Caleb's heart like a physical blow, sending ripples of a strange numbness outward until they enveloped his entire being. He frowned in discomfort, unable to pinpoint the source of his pain. His subconscious mind, in a desperate act of self-preservation, attributed the overwhelming feeling to Julian himself and instinctively wrapped his heart in thick armor. His voice was indifferent when he spoke, stating that Julian probably didn't need an answer anymore, so now he could leave. Julian's quiet acknowledgement sounded like a mixture of helplessness and surrender. He stuffed his hands, which had been hanging awkwardly at his sides, into his pockets. He offered no argument, no attempt to salvage the situation. He simply turned and began to walk away, toward the lonely glow of a distant streetlight, each step seeming to pull him from a thick, clinging mire. Caleb stood his ground, knowing he should turn and leave as well, but his gaze remained glued to the retreating figure. The armor around his heart now felt like a crushing weight, constricting his chest, the spreading numbness turning into a faint sense of suffocation. The soft footsteps faded, from clearly audible in the night to complete silence. Julian paused under the streetlight and turned to look back at him one last time. Bathed in the dim, yellow light, he seemed to be imbued with a profound loneliness. His eyes looked as if they held a secret, and at the same time, as if they were completely empty. The moment Julian turned, Caleb's face contorted. In his world, people were masters of reading expressions, and he himself was a master of concealing his own. But now, caught off guard by Julian's sudden glance, he was completely exposed. He didn't need a mirror to know that the intense emotions churning inside him were written all over his face. He suppressed the sharp pain in his chest and forced his expression back to one of detached amusement, even managing a fake smile. He had already rehearsed a dozen cool, witty retorts in his mind, ready to deliver them with a smirk when Julian inevitably turned back, hope rekindled in his eyes, to question him again. But reality diverged sharply from his expectations. Julian did not turn back. His face showed no trace of a smile, no flicker of emotion that Caleb could seize upon. He simply held his gaze for a second, then slowly turned away. A hairline crack appeared in Caleb's impenetrable armor. His chest heaved, and a wildfire of rage ignited in his veins, threatening to turn his eyes red. But beneath the anger was a deeper, duller ache. His mind went blank. He strode towards the figure under the streetlight. He grabbed Julian's arm from behind, pinning him against the lamppost. He lowered his head and captured Julian's lips, his kiss fierce and demanding as he forced his way past his teeth. As his tongue swept inside, his own defenses crumbled. He buried his face in Julian's neck, his voice a hoarse, ragged growl. "You want to be with me? Fine. From this second on, you forget your ex-boyfriend ever existed." The response was Julian's even more passionate kiss. But Caleb suddenly cupped his chin, pulling his tongue from Julian's mouth. Julian looked up, his brow furrowed in a silent question. A wave of clarity washed over Caleb. He frowned, his lip curling. "What did you just eat?" he demanded. "Your mouth tastes off." Julian paused for a moment, then blinked sheepishly. "Pizza," he admitted. "The kind you get for $2 a slice from the late-night place." "Is it that bad?" He took a step back, cupped his hand over his mouth, and blew a soft breath, sniffing cautiously. It was a delivery for Mike, the night guard. Caleb turned Julian's face to the side. "Stay away from me," he ordered dismissively. Then he couldn't help but narrow his eyes. "And who the hell is Mike?" Julian explained it was the security guard. The man's lips twisted into a cold smile. "So while I was out in the middle of the night looking for you, you were happily sitting in the security booth, sharing a pizza with some guy?" Julian showed no remorse, his eyes curving as he mumbled something about the so-called emotionally stunted straight guy adapting to the role of boyfriend pretty quickly. Caleb was momentarily speechless. He crossed his arms, looking Julian up and down coolly. "Julian," he said. Julian responded with a cheerful, "What?" Caleb's face was blank. "I think you're about to become an international sensation for breaking the world record for the shortest relationship." "What?" Julian asked. "To be single 1 second, and then get dumped by your brand new boyfriend the next, all because of something you said," Caleb mused. "How tragic." Julian replied with breezy confidence, wrapping his arms around Caleb's waist and pressing against him, rubbing playfully. He looked up and blinked. "Well then, my soon-to-be ex-boyfriend, I'm hereby informing you that you owe me one last round of breakup sex." Julian was the first to pull away. He walked to the community gate, used the access card Caleb had forgotten, and swiped it to open the door. He held the door open and turned back, urging Caleb to hurry up. From the security booth, Mike, who was engrossed in a daytime talk show rerun, poked his head out the window and waved cheerfully at Julian before disappearing back inside, muttering to himself about how a couple that fought all the time must have a really strong relationship. After saying goodbye to the young guard, Julian hurried to catch up with Caleb, who was already several yards ahead, and naturally reached for his hand. Caleb shifted slightly, trying to pull his hand free while speaking impatiently. It's the middle of the night. Why are you being so clingy? Julian instinctively looked up at him. The man's features were shadowed in the deep darkness, hard to make out clearly. Julian, unsure of his mood, chuckled vaguely. He reasoned that it was precisely because it was late and no one was around that it was the perfect time to be clingy. Though he said this, he cautiously loosened his fingers, slowly withdrawing from the man's grasp. Caleb paused for a second, then asked with an unreadable tone if he meant that Caleb wasn't presentable in the daylight. Julian's voice was full of laughter as he assured him that wasn't what he meant at all. He had just started to explain when Caleb cut him off with a short laugh. The next second, the man's long, strong fingers closed around his retreating ones, pulling his hand back and holding it tight, cutting off any chance of escape. While most new couples go through a period of adjustment, Julian and Caleb's relationship seemed to fall into place with startling ease. As if they had skipped the passionate honeymoon phase and gone straight to behaving like a long-married couple. Given his family background, looks, and physique, Caleb never lacked for casual partners. But when it came to actual relationships, aside from a brief high school romance, he was largely inexperienced. Consequently, he failed to notice anything unusual about his dynamic with Julian. There were no extra texts or calls during the day. On a Friday evening, he arranged to pick Julian up for dinner, waiting in his car at the subway station near Julian's office. When Julian opened the passenger door to get in, Caleb glanced over and asked what he wanted to eat. "Anything's fine," Julian replied distractedly, rummaging through the center console for CDs. He didn't find the indie rock albums he'd bought last time and looked up, puzzled, asking where they were. Caleb froze for a second, remembering how he'd angrily thrown them into a storage box in the garage weeks ago. He looked away, mumbling that he'd put them away. Julian pressed him, asking where. "In a box in the garage," Caleb admitted, his brow twitching. Julian closed the console. His lips pressed into a flat line and fell silent, focusing his attention on his phone. Seeing him quiet for so long, Caleb tapped his fingers on the steering wheel impatiently. He grumbled that it was Julian's own fault for going to a romantic restaurant with another man. As he thought about it, his irritation grew. Not only that, but he had to take his dog along. Julian suddenly looked up at him. A smirk played on Caleb's lips as he asked if he had said anything wrong. Julian nodded, his tone placating. "You're right. Everything you said is right." He pointed to a food blog on his phone, his eyes dark and bright. "Let's go get hot pot." Caleb rejected the idea without a second thought. Perhaps because his mother was American, his culinary preferences leaned heavily towards Western cuisine, and he rarely set foot in traditional hot pot restaurants. "Let's get steak," Caleb countered, changing the subject. He asked lazily which steakhouse Julian preferred. Julian replied with unapologetic confidence that he didn't like any of them. If he hadn't successfully won Caleb over yet, he would have likely agreed to steak without hesitation, even if it meant eating it for a week straight. But now they were in an equal partnership. As much as he liked Caleb, he wasn't going to compromise on such a small matter. His refusal to yield on details didn't mean his affection was any less genuine. Julian turned to look at the sharp, handsome profile of Caleb's face, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his eyes. His gaze was as full of warmth and sincerity as it had been on their first meeting, a calm surface that rippled with the slightest breeze. Caleb turned and met his lingering, affectionate stare. He paused, his expression unreadable, and then, as if possessed, he heard himself say, "Fine, let's get hot pot." After dinner, they drove back to the city. The black SUV came to a stop in the dim, quiet parking garage. Caleb killed the engine and turned to remind Julian to get out, only to find him slumped against the seat, eyes closed, his breathing shallow and even. Caleb leaned closer, intending to pinch his nose to wake him, but his fingers paused just before making contact. He retracted his hand and instead unbuckled Julian's seatbelt. As he straightened up, he felt a soft, warm touch on his chin. He looked down and met Julian's wide-awake eyes. He raised an eyebrow, asking if he was faking. Julian didn't answer. Instead, he reached out, turned off the interior light, and wrapped his arms around Caleb's waist. In the darkness, he tilted his head back, his lips searching for the man's throat, tracing a path upward until they found Caleb's mouth. He brushed his lips lightly against Caleb's, his breath mingling with the others as he spoke. He asked softly, in a low voice, if Caleb wanted to. Caleb paused for a second, then grabbed him by the back of his collar and pulled him away, his face impassive. He even offered a faint smile, asking if Julian knew what he was like right now. Like what? Julian asked, his voice laced with amusement. Like a walking hot pot, the man replied, patting his cheek. The disgust was palpable. Go take a shower and brush your teeth. Julian seemed a little incredulous. He pursed his lips and asked again if he was sure. Caleb, already halfway out of the car, didn't look back. I don't sleep with people who smell like broth. Fine, Julian muttered, a little disappointed, as he got out of the car. He grumbled under his breath, you're the one with all the self-control. Upstairs, they went to their separate bathrooms to shower. Julian lay in the tub for a while, the steam making him drowsy. The impulse from the car faded, replaced by the simple desire to go to sleep. He quickly got out, dried off, and put on his pajamas. He had just climbed into bed, his legs still dangling over the side, when a hand clamped around his ankle and yanked him back down. In the dim light, he thought he saw a storm brewing in Caleb's eyes. He turned, confused, trying to get a better look, but the man's expression was calm and placid, as if the previous moment had been a figment of his imagination. But then Caleb's words proved that he hadn't imagined it. The man released his ankle, stood up, and told him to go brush his teeth. Julian mumbled an okay and leaned against the headboard to find his slippers, completely missing the way the man's fingers, now hanging at his side, subtly rubbed together. He put on his slippers and had just stepped into the bathroom when the tall man followed him in, wordlessly claiming half the space in front of the sink. Julian, holding his toothbrush, found his elbow uncomfortably pressed against the other man's arm. He turned to give Caleb a look, silently asking him to move over. The latter ignored him, lifting his chin and letting his gaze drift from the other toothbrush in the cup on the shelf to Julian's reflection in the mirror. With a mouthful of white foam, Julian shot the mirror an exasperated look, then reached over, took the other toothbrush, squeezed toothpaste onto it, and handed it to the man without turning around. They brushed their teeth in silence, facing the mirror, the only sound the soft bristles whispering against their teeth. 3 minutes later, Julian picked up his rinsing cup, filled it with water, and spat the foamy mixture into the sink. As he did, the cup in his hand suddenly felt lighter. Caleb had taken it. He looked up, unable to see the other man's expression clearly, only catching a glimpse of him using the same cup to rinse his own mouth. Julian stood there, dumbfounded. When Caleb straightened up, he pointed in disbelief at the cup still in Caleb's hand, telling him that it was his cup. He then pointed to the one remaining on the shelf, clarifying that that one was Caleb's. Caleb gave him a thoughtful glance, asking why he couldn't use his. Julian retracted his finger, speaking slowly. It wasn't that, he said, it was just, you sleep in my bed. Caleb interrupted nonchalantly, so I can't use your cup? He then urged him to hurry up and wipe his mouth. But Julian didn't move. He narrowed his eyes, perplexed. He felt that Caleb was acting strangely, but he couldn't put his finger on why. Seeing him lost in thought, Caleb's patience seemed to wear thin. He didn't even bother to speak, simply placing the cup on the edge of the sink and covering Julian's lips with his hand. His thumb roughly wiped across the corner of his mouth, pulling Julian's thoughts back to reality. Julian's gaze shifted to the mirror just in time to see Caleb wipe away the last of the white toothpaste from his lips, then turn on the faucet to rinse his fingers. Julian was stunned for a second, sensing a strange urgency in the way the man washed his hands. He reached out and grabbed Caleb's forearm, opening his mouth to speak. Caleb abruptly turned off the faucet, his hands still wet. Before Julian could get a full sentence out, he grabbed the hand on his arm, pulled Julian towards him, and pinned him against the wall next to the mirror. He lowered his head and kissed him hard, the faint minty taste of toothpaste still lingering on his lips. Satisfied, Caleb smirked, trapping Julian against the wall with his body. His hand slipped under the hem of Julian's pajama shirt, his mouth finding the pale skin of his neck. Amidst Julian's dazed expression, he lowered his voice and enunciated each word clearly. "I really am," he said, just barely holding on. In the late spring of early April, Alex's mountain resort, newly renovated, launched a new theme. He invited Marcus for a meal, who in turn brought along a group of wealthy scions. Even within the upper echelons of society, there are inner circles, and those circles are usually fixed. It's not easy for outsiders to break in, and those who manage to, usually through family connections, don't leave willingly. So, the group that came to play was largely the same as the one from February. The day Marcus called, Shane had just returned from a vacation in Europe. He hadn't seen Caleb in a month or two. The first thing he did upon his return was to have someone look into Caleb's recent activities. The next day, he learned that an up-and-coming actress he had deliberately suppressed a few months ago had somehow landed a collaboration with Caleb's company, even getting 2 Asian brand endorsements for free. Putting the pieces together, it seemed like the typical unsavory story of a starlet sleeping her way to the top. This only confirmed Shane's suspicions. The actress had gotten to Caleb. As a result, Shane relaxed his guard regarding the news of Julian and Caleb getting closer. He dismissed it, believing Caleb was straight. He figured if Alex could use his roommate status to latch onto Marcus, then Julian, as Alex's friend, was probably cut from the same cloth, just trying to curry favor with Caleb's family for business advantages. On the phone, Marcus was brief, simply stating the time and asking if he was coming. Shane, lounging on his sofa, glanced at the actress's face in a TV commercial, a cold look in his eyes. "Of course I'm coming," he said. "How could I miss a party where Caleb is?" He paused, then added with a faint smile, "Bring Julian along too. I hear he's been very close to Caleb these past 2 months." After hanging up, Marcus ran his thumb over the back of his phone. The memory of seeing Alex's friend, legs bare, sneaking out of Caleb's room early one morning at the resort 2 years ago flashed in his mind, a flicker of interest in his eyes. He bypassed Alex in his contacts and called Caleb directly. He mentioned the party, chatted briefly about a company project, and then, just before hanging up, casually added that Caleb should bring Julian with him. Caleb's response was non-committal, but a thoughtful expression crossed his face. It wasn't just that Marcus and Julian barely knew each other. Even if Marcus had wanted to invite Julian, the more logical route would have been through Alex. Caleb tossed his phone onto the nightstand and glanced down at the person lying on his chest playing on their phone. "Julian," he said, "are you trying to crush me?" Julian lifted his chin from the slight valley between the man's pectoral muscles, glanced at his expression, and then, with a grin, turned his head to rest his cheek on the man's chest, continuing to play on his phone as if no one else was there. Caleb clicked his tongue and cupped Julian's face, forcing him to look up again. "Did you hear the phone call?" he asked. Julian thought for a moment, recalling something about an invitation to the mountain resort for a couple of days, and asked if Caleb was going. Caleb held his chin, confirming that he was, and that he'd been told to bring Julian along. Julian was stunned for a second, then shook his head slowly. "I'm not going," he said. Caleb was surprised, raising an eyebrow. "Really?" Julian smiled. "Really? Fine, suit yourself," Caleb said with a glance, a smirk playing on his lips. "Just remember what you said. Don't come begging me to take you later." Julian's tone was firm. Of course, since he had said he wasn't going, that should have been the end of it. Caleb was silent for a moment. Then, as if remembering something, he asked when Julian had gotten to know Marcus. "We don't," Julian replied, unless you count having a mutual childhood friend as a connection. Caleb studied him with a skeptical gaze, as if weighing the truth of his words, before finally releasing his chin with a grunt. "Good," he said. Without the support, Julian found it tiring to talk to the man while looking up. He rolled off Caleb's chest, but with too much force, nearly taking the duvet with him and rolling right off the bed. Caleb quickly reached out and pulled him back from the edge, retrieving a portion of the duvet to cover himself before draping a leg over Julian's, pinning him down. He then remarked with undisguised amusement that he'd never seen anyone who slept as badly as Julian. Julian mumbled in protest, asking what was wrong with the way he slept. "Everything," Caleb retorted, holding down his restless hands under the covers. He added with a smirk that if he didn't hold Julian while they slept, the duvet would be gone by morning. Julian murmured an okay and blinked at him. "Caleb?" he asked. Caleb lifted his eyelids. "What now?" Julian shifted his legs under the covers, managing to free one and hook it over Caleb's calf, trapping Caleb's leg between his own. He deliberately nudged his knee against the sensitive skin of the man's inner thigh. "If you wanted to hold me while you sleep," he purred, "you just had to say so." The man unceremoniously pulled him out from under the covers and sat him up, his tone a mixture of feigned anger and amusement as he lectured him about being the most shameless person he'd ever met. Julian lowered his gaze and mumbled a non-committal okay in acknowledgement. He then climbed onto Caleb's lap, looked him straight in the eye, and with a slow smile, asked if he had a problem with it. Caleb stared at him for a moment, not answering directly, but his eyes darkened. He said that not only did Julian not show any remorse when corrected, but he also pushed his luck. As if completely oblivious to the shift in mood, Julian nodded in agreement, his smile widening. "What if I do?" he challenged. "What then?" Caleb retorted without missing a beat, his tone cold and decisive. "Then you need to be taught a lesson." At his words, Julian showed no sign of apology or fear. On the contrary, as if encouraged, he shifted forward, his hands on the man's thighs, and asked with a slow, rising inflection, "I'm waiting." Caleb's gaze intensified. One hand clamped around his waist, the other on the back of his head, and they began to kiss in the morning light. A week later, on Friday, Julian, for the first time, didn't spend the night at Caleb's. The next morning, when Caleb saw Julian appear out of nowhere at the resort, he remembered the smiling refusal from his bed a few days prior and the claim that he wouldn't beg. A smirk touched his lips. Little liar, he thought. In fact, Alex's call had come a few days before Caleb's. Since their last dinner, Julian had been entirely focused on Caleb, while Alex had been busy with the resort's renovations, so they hadn't seen each other. Consequently, when Alex called, he had no idea that Julian had already succeeded with Caleb, and he confidently assured him that if he came, he would get to see Caleb. Julian didn't correct him, simply agreeing with a smile. He arrived at the resort on Friday night, sent a text to Caleb saying he wouldn't be over, and then went with Alex to the resort's bar. The newly hired bartender was a handsome young foreigner who whistled appreciatively when he saw Julian. He slid a colorful cocktail across the bar and made his move directly. "You're my type," he said. "My room tonight?" Julian took the drink, swirled it gently, and looked up with a regretful expression. "That's a shame," he replied. "You're not my type. How about you teach me how to make a drink instead?" The bartender feigned an exaggerated look of shock. "To so casually refuse my gentlemanly invitation and then attempt to steal my one-of-a-kind bartending skills? Adorable American, you're the first. But I like it." He opened the small gate to the side of the bar and gestured for him to come in. "Now I find you even more adorable," he continued, chattering on. "You know, a bartender's bar is like a man's beloved Lamborghini. As the first sweetheart to step into my private space, you should feel greatly honored." Julian's expression remained neutral. 6 years of living abroad had accustomed him to the casual teasing of tall, muscular white men. He stayed at the bar until the middle of the night, thoroughly entertained. By the time he got back to his room and fell asleep, the sky was already beginning to lighten. Julian sank into a deep sleep, oblivious to the world outside, changing from the first light of dawn to bright daylight and then to the full splendor of a spring morning. Perhaps it was because of his encounter with the foreign bartender, but in his dreams, Julian found himself back in his college years in America. He stood on the campus avenue, lined with century-old trees, the grand, cathedral-like library ahead of him. Blonde, fair-skinned students hurried past, books in their arms, speaking rapid, fluent American English that buzzed in his ears like a high school listening comprehension test. Julian turned around in confusion, but the scene before him fractured and peeled away. The old library and the tree-lined avenue disappeared, replaced by the dim, seductive lighting of a bar and the cool gaze of a dark-haired, mixed-race boy standing behind the counter. If Alex's bartender was a smooth talker, then his ex-boyfriend could be described as taciturn. So much so that when he had proudly announced to his friends that he and Chris were dating, no one had believed he was the one who had been pursued. Julian stood in his dream, in the bar where he and Chris had first met, and sighed softly before slowly opening his eyes. He woke to the harsh, golden sunlight flooding the room. He sat up, his eyes still heavy with sleep, and watched the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. He realized that the rainy season of spring had been gone for some time. The weather had turned warm, though he couldn't recall when. Julian got out of bed and went for a walk in the strawberry patch. Half an hour later, he returned with a full basket, his usually neat black hair now slightly messy, with stray strands curling at his temples. The sleeves and legs of his shirt and pants were rolled up haphazardly, and the hem of his white shirt was stained with dirt and grass. A thin sheen of sweat covered his nose, making him look like a college student in his early 20s. He stopped at the outdoor sink, holding the heavy woven basket in one hand, and dipped his other hand into the cool, clear water flowing from a bamboo pipe. The sound of overlapping voices and footsteps approached from behind, growing clearer. Julian pulled his hand out of the water and shook it, sending crystalline droplets flying into the warm spring breeze, where they refracted the bright sunlight into a beautiful rainbow. He straightened up, holding the basket of plump, red strawberries, and turned towards the sound. A group of impeccably dressed, privileged young men walked towards him. The tall, dark-haired, mixed-race man lagged behind, his handsome features becoming clearer as he drew nearer, until his brown, amber-like eyes locked onto him. The people were the same, the strawberry patch was the same, and he was the same Julian. But Caleb's gaze was no longer the indifferent and distant one from their first meeting months ago. He wasn't holding a phone, and there was no surprise on his face. In Caleb's slightly arrested gaze, Julian beamed and held up the basket of strawberries, his voice light and cheerful. "Want some strawberries?" he asked. "Just picked them." The afternoon was, as usual, dedicated to a card game. The lesser scions, with their meager monthly allowances, weren't qualified for the high-stakes table, so it was just Caleb and a few others. Two waiters stood by, one shuffling the cards while the other respectfully offered cigarettes and a light. Caleb took a cigarette and placed it between his lips, his peripheral vision catching the waiter who was leaning over to light Marcus's cigarette. Someone presented a beautifully arranged fruit platter to him. Without turning his head, Caleb said dismissively to just leave it. The platter was placed on a stand, but the person didn't leave. Caleb, annoyed, turned to scold them, but was met with Julian's innocent, obedient face. The harsh words died on his lips. He thought for a second. Then, as if remembering something, he took the cigarette from his mouth. The waiter with the lighter had already moved to his other side, hand half extended, but now froze in place. Across the table, Shane glanced over, his tone icy. "Is he bothering you?" Caleb didn't speak. Shane took this as confirmation and stood up, ready to verbally lash out at the waiter, who looked terrified at the undeserved wrath. Julian took the lighter from the waiter's hand and leaned towards Caleb, his expression neutral as he looked at the side of the man's face visible to Shane and the others. but the corner of his mouth on the other side curved into a tiny, mischievous smile. "Mr. Thorne," he said, "let me." Caleb studied him with a cool expression for a moment, then slowly put the cigarette back between his lips, leaned back in his chair, and tilted his chin slightly in his direction, a silent assent. Across the table, Shane's gaze darkened. A week ago, when he'd asked Marcus to invite Julian, his intention had been to see how many times Caleb would deign to look at this shameless social climber. He hadn't expected Julian to have already secured a position where he could speak to Caleb. He had some skill, Shane conceded, but he remained unimpressed, a faint, mocking look in his eyes. This was as far as he would get. Lost in his own thoughts, he completely missed what happened in the blind spot created by Julian's body. As Julian leaned in to light Caleb's cigarette, one hand shielding the flame, the little finger of his other hand subtly brushed against the man's lips. And he certainly didn't see Caleb's eyes snap open, his gaze darkening, or his lips move to form two silent words. Later, as the cigarette lit, Julian stepped back, his face impassive, and placed the lighter back on the waiter's tray. Before he could fully straighten up, he felt a hand squeeze his behind firmly. He whipped his head around, but the others at the table were all focused on their cards, their expressions unchanged, as if they hadn't seen a thing. He rubbed his nose and glanced at the man beside him, who was now drawing a card, his amber eyes fixed on the table. Julian stared at his profile for a moment. As if sensing his gaze, Caleb slowly turned his head, a mocking glint in his eyes, and mumbled, "What are you so tense about?" Only then did the other three look up from their cards, their gazes a mixture of curiosity and nonchalance. Julian covered his twitching lips and sat down, reaching for a plump, red strawberry from the platter. The sweet juice burst in his mouth. He thoughtfully narrowed his eyes, then picked up another one. As he brought it to his mouth, his elbow jutted out just as Caleb was retracting his own hand after playing a card. Their arms collided. The strawberry slipped from Julian's fingers and rolled silently under the table. Julian shot Caleb a look of clear displeasure. Caleb looked back, not bothering to say a word, which only confirmed that his previous action had been intentional. A faint smirk played on his lips, his deep eyes seeming to ask, "What are you going to do now?" That evening, when Julian walked into the bar, he heard the bartender's rich voice before he even saw the bar itself. The sound winding its way through the door and landing in his ear with an enthusiastic lilt. "Oh my God, you are absolutely my type. My room tonight?" Julian crossed the dance floor and headed towards the source of the voice. In the flashing, colorful lights, he recognized the handsome man sitting at the bar immediately. He instinctively scanned the room and, as expected, didn't see Shane. If Shane had been there, he certainly wouldn't have stood by and watched a handsome young man flirt so openly with Caleb. And the passionate bartender wouldn't still be in one piece. Julian walked up, placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder, and sat down beside him. He took the glass from Caleb's hand, brought it to his lips, and took a sip, his eyes smiling as he looked at the young foreigner behind the bar. "That's what you said to me yesterday." The man whose drink had just been stolen turned his head, his gaze sweeping over him. The bartender's eyes shifted from the glass in Julian's hand to Caleb's face, and he held up his hands in a gesture of innocence. "In fact," he said, "I have many types." But he paused, his gaze fixed on Caleb. "You can believe that he didn't accept my invitation, so I did nothing with him." At that moment, anyone would have thought that the foreigner was trying to distance himself from a previous conquest to impress a new one. And that's exactly what Julian thought. White people were often bold and direct. During his years in America, after he and his ex-boyfriend moved in together, the young, muscular white men who had a thing for Asians and had coveted either him or his ex had accepted their relationship and become friends. But they would still occasionally make harmless, flirty jokes at dinner. Having been immersed in that environment for so long, Julian didn't find it shocking. Even his ex, who was half Chinese and had a conservative streak, never made a scene, and on good days would even play along. The only consequence was that later that night, he would be a little rougher than usual. Julian feigned displeasure, resting his hand on the bar and waggling his index finger at the bartender. "That's not what you said yesterday," he accused. "You called me sweetheart." Caleb's gaze was no longer a light sweep, but a long, hard stare, an aura of danger emanating from him. He looked at the bartender like a hunter whose private territory had been invaded by an unlucky trespasser. The bartender looked aghast, as if he wished he could turn back time 24 hours and get a do-over. He stammered an explanation, saying that Julian might not know, but in his country, sweetheart was just a common greeting. Only then did Julian sense something was amiss in the man's reaction. But he had no intention of helping him out. In fact, he wore a smile of someone enjoying the show from the sidelines, his eyes full of pity for the bartender. The tall, muscular man now looked like a dejected big dog. The next second, Shane's appearance saved him. Shane himself would probably never know that, aside from the usual sycophants, his arrival at that moment was the most welcome it had ever been in his entire life. Of course, that feeling lasted only for a second. When Shane, completely oblivious, called out to Julian and happily sat down next to Caleb, the bartender's eyes narrowed, the emotion in them vanishing. It wasn't that he disliked Shane because he knew Julian. Even just based on looks, of all the types he liked, Shane wasn't one of them. Shane was completely unaware of the bartender's thoughts, his attention solely on the man he adored. Seeing the colorful cocktail by Caleb's hand, he reached for it without thinking, his voice cloying. "I want a drink too." A hand intercepted his, picking up the glass and swirling it before presenting it to him. Julian smiled. "If you don't mind my saliva on the rim, the glass is yours." Shane immediately frowned, his gaze instinctively flicking towards Caleb, only to be met with an indifferent profile. He pursed his lips, annoyed at being embarrassed in front of Caleb, and rapped on the bar, ordering the young foreigner to make him his best drink. The bartender responded with a lazy okay and turned to get his equipment. Shane, having been rebuffed by Caleb, started to lean towards him again, but was stopped by the coldness in the man's eyes. A stark reminder of the unpleasant memory from months ago at this very resort. He straightened up, chastened. The returning bartender placed a crystal-clear drink between them, the base of the highball glass making a sharp clinking sound on the marble countertop. Shane jumped, and when he recovered, he turned to yell at the disrespectful bartender. But his gaze caught Julian leaning casually against the bar, watching him with a blank expression. He shot a sharp look at Julian, who simply raised his eyebrows in a confused expression. Shane shrugged it off, picked up the quickly made cocktail and took a sip. The next second, his face contorted. He spat the liquid back into the glass, shot to his feet, and threw the rest of the drink at the bartender, screaming, "What the hell did you give me?" The bartender dodged the drink and let out a string of rapid, slurred foreign words. Shane, not understanding, pulled out his phone and furiously called Alex, telling the person on the other end to fire his bartender immediately. The bartender stood there nonchalantly, even finding the time to whisper to Julian, "I see why you turned me down last night. You have a boyfriend who's even hotter than me." Julian blinked and leaned on the bar, asking how he could tell. "Isn't it obvious?" The bartender said, tilting his head and glancing at Shane's retreating, furious back. Only that thirsty, angry customer couldn't see it. The bartender then lowered his voice. "Sweetheart," he said, "I helped you out. Shouldn't you thank me?" Julian said, "Oh? How do you want me to thank you? A date is out of the question. I can't handle your handsome boyfriend." He opened a small drawer and pulled out a rose gold-plated business card, tucking it into Julian's shirt pocket. "Don't let your fierce boyfriend see this," he said. "But if you know any other excellent men like him, you have to introduce me. I like them rough in bed." Julian pocketed the flashy card and smiled sincerely. He was about to say something when he felt a tug on the back of his collar, pulling him backward. Caleb's extremely annoyed voice came from above. "What are you two whispering about? You're practically glued together." Julian turned his head and smiled at the man. "Want it tonight?" Caleb's eyes darkened instantly. He grabbed Julian's wrist and pulled him out of the bar. Shane, who had just been placated and sent away by Alex 5 minutes earlier, had no idea what he had just missed. A scene that would have infuriated him even more than being tricked by the bartender. They walked through the night, across the courtyard behind Caleb's room, through the entryway and living room, and into the bedroom, lit only by the silvery moonlight. Caleb stopped, turned, and closed the door, pinning Julian against the solid wood. His strong arm braced against the door by Julian's face, his broad shoulders blocking the moonlight. A hot, urgent kiss descended. Julian closed his eyes and slid his hands under Caleb's shirt, his fingers digging into his waist. Shane, having calmed down, remembered that Caleb was still at the bar. He started to go back, but was told on the way that Caleb had already left. Shane changed direction and headed for Caleb's room. He was about to ring the doorbell when his phone rang. A few days ago, after returning to the country, though he had concluded that the actress had gotten to Caleb, he had, just to be cautious, hired someone to tail her. Caleb lifted him up and strode towards the bed. Shane held the phone to his ear, his expression unreadable. Through the faint static, he heard the person on the other end tell him timidly that the actress's private schedule was too secure. He hadn't been able to get any evidence of her being with Caleb. Julian lay back on the bed, Caleb on top of him. Shane hung up the phone, his face dark, his grip on the warm phone tightening. He let out a low, cold scoff and walked away without looking back, heading straight for Julian's room. Julian's eyes were squeezed shut, his lower lip caught between his teeth, his body, buried in the soft duvet, convulsing slightly. The floodgates, held back for so long, had burst. A tear escaped from the corner of his reddened eye. Shane stood outside Julian's door. The sharp, shrill sound of the doorbell echoed in the dim hallway, but no one answered. Julian wiped the tear from the corner of his eye, a satisfied sigh escaping his lips. Shane, suppressing his rage, took out his phone and called Julian repeatedly. The soft, pleasant ringtone filled the air. Caleb threw a blanket over Julian's phone, muffling the incessant sound. The sounds of passion filled the spacious bedroom. The mechanical female voice of the unanswered call still lingered in the air. Shane, in a fit of rage, threw his phone. An hour later, Julian, dressed and back in his own room, returned Shane's call. Shane, his face grim, came over and entered his room without a word. He stood with his back to Julian in the bright light and made his offer. "Your family's little business," he said. "The Thorn Corporation can help you, and so can my family." Julian was bewildered, finding the whole situation ridiculous, but he played along. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. Shane's voice was dark and deliberate. "I want you to keep an eye on Caleb for me. Find out who's been climbing into his bed." Julian was only half listening, his gaze fixed on his reflection in a nearby mirror. He belatedly noticed a purplish love bite on his neck. Shane, growing impatient, turned around. Julian snapped back to attention and, just as Shane's gaze fell on him, he raised his hand as if in exhaustion and rubbed the side of his neck, nonchalantly covering the mark. He smiled and agreed. "No problem." On Sunday afternoon, as Julian was leaving, Alex offered to drive him. Julian declined, but Alex ignored him and pulled his car around anyway, only to see him sitting on a bench in the shade, head down, idly playing on his phone as if waiting for someone. Alex honked twice. Julian looked up, and upon seeing his car, his expression was one of resignation, but he still walked over and got into the passenger seat. The first thing he asked was if Alex had actually listened to Shane and fired the bartender. "Nope," Alex said, turning the key in the ignition. "Just gave him a few days off." He put his hand over Alex's on the key. "You really don't have to drive me." Alex glanced over at him. "I'm heading home tonight anyway. It's on the way." Julian had no choice but to be blunt. "I'm getting a ride with Caleb." Alex scoffed. "He's not leaving now." I heard Marcus say the stables just got some new colts. He was going to check them out this afternoon. Julian stared at him silently, his gaze seeming to pass through him and fix on the window behind him. Alex hesitated for a second, then frowned and asked in a low voice if Caleb had personally told him he would drive him back today. Julian pulled his gaze back and gestured with his chin towards the space behind Alex, a smile on his face. "Why don't you ask him yourself?" he said. Before Alex could respond, there were 2 soft taps on the window. Alex turned and saw the handsome, frowning man standing outside. He instinctively lowered the window. Before he could speak, Caleb leaned down, one arm resting on the window frame, his eyes on Julian, a smirk on his face. "I've been waiting for you forever," he said. "And you're just sitting here in the car with your good friend, holding hands, reluctant to leave? Do you need a farewell kiss too?" His words seemed to confirm what Julian had said about Caleb driving him, but Alex sensed something was off. Julian immediately pulled his hand from Alex's arm and made a placating gesture at Caleb, but showed no intention of getting out. Instead, he looked at Alex, drawing out his words clearly. "I forgot to tell you." Caleb saw his perfunctory gesture and snorted. He stood up, walked around the front of the car, and opened the passenger door. He stood there, arms crossed, looking down at him impatiently. "Are you going to get out? Or do I have to unbuckle you and pull you out myself?" Julian said a meek okay, swallowed the rest of his sentence, and scrambled out of the car, heading for another one parked a short distance behind Alex's. Caleb followed him and got into the driver's seat. Alex, stunned for a second, unbuckled his own seatbelt and got out. He walked to the other car and saw Marcus standing by the driver's side window, talking to Caleb. He waved a greeting, then went around to the passenger side and asked with a frown, "What did you forget to tell me?" Julian, who was buckling his seatbelt, paused. He looked up, smiled at him, then, his eyes still on Alex outside the car, he called out Caleb's name. Caleb stopped his conversation with Marcus and turned to look at him silently. Julian, one hand on the seat, leaned over and kissed Caleb on the cheek. Then he turned back to his childhood friend, whose expression was slowly freezing over, and said with a brilliant smile, "I forgot to tell you that Caleb is my boyfriend now." Alex's eyes shot up to Marcus's face, and he was even more shocked to see that Marcus's expression was completely unfazed. It wasn't until Caleb's car had disappeared from view that Alex finally managed to speak, his voice dry. "Isn't Caleb straight?" he asked. Marcus's expression was calm. "Your friend has some skills," he remarked, rubbing his temples. "You knew all along?" Marcus glanced at him. "I certainly knew before you did." "So that means," Alex began, looking speechless. "I was the last to know." Marcus paused. "Not necessarily," he said. Then, as if remembering something, he added lightly, "You were probably the second to last." When Monday came, someone at the office brought up the old story of how Julian had stolen a project from a senior colleague for the actress a few months ago. The senior colleague, furious and banking on his seniority, started openly making Julian's work life difficult. The others just turned a blind eye. Tired of dealing with it, Julian slept in until noon on Wednesday, then leaned against his headboard and sent a resignation email to the company. HR called to inform him that he needed to give a month's notice and complete a handover. Julian, squinting and stretching, said he didn't want last month's or this month's salary and hung up. He played on his phone for a bit, then got out of bed, put on his slippers and shuffled out of his room, yawning, only to run into his father, also a late riser, emerging from another bedroom with a messy bird's nest of hair. Father and son froze, staring at each other with sleepy eyes. With Julian working during the day and spending most nights at Caleb's, he rarely ran into his dad at home. His father was the first to recover. "Hungover last night, taking the day off," he explained. Julian grunted in acknowledgement. His father looked surprised. "You don't have work today?" Julian leaned lazily against the doorframe. "Quit." His father was even more surprised. "When?" "Just now," Julian yawned. His father was silent for a moment, then clapped his hands together happily. "Great. Then you can come with me to dinner at Riverview Pavilion tonight." Now it was Julian's turn to be speechless. He mumbled in confusion, "What dinner?" His dad glanced at him, his question a statement. "You've been staying out all night recently. Got a boyfriend?" Julian was even more confused, his hand on his chin as he wondered if his dad wanted to have dinner with Caleb. It wasn't out of the question. He could ask Caleb when he was free. He came back to the present and looked up. "I do," he said. "But what does that have to do with dinner tonight?" His dad waved his hand dismissively. "Since you do, then tonight we'll all..." Before he could finish, the phone in his pajama pocket rang. He quickly answered it and walked towards his study, and the topic was dropped. Julian didn't think much of it and went back to harassing his current boyfriend via text. His current boyfriend was in a high-level meeting. He noticed the frequent vibrations from his phone on the table, glanced at the messages from Julian, and replied coolly, "In a meeting. Don't bother me." He then silenced his phone and placed it face down. 2 minutes later, he subconsciously flipped it over again to see if the notification light was blinking. But it remained dark for the rest of the meeting. Back in his office, Caleb tossed his phone into a drawer, sat down, and idly flipped through a work summary on his desk. After a couple of seconds, he closed it, stood up, retrieved his phone, and dialed Julian's number. The moment the call connected, he asked, "What is it?" Julian was taken aback for a second, then asked what he meant. Caleb clicked his tongue. "What did you want earlier?" Julian, realizing what he was talking about, laughed softly. "Nothing much." Caleb paused, then raised an eyebrow. "If it's nothing, I'm hanging up." Julian quickly stopped him and admitted sheepishly that it was a small thing. He had quit his job. Caleb let out a derisive snort and began to mercilessly list his faults. "Unemployed." Julian said, "Oh." "Idle." Julian said, "Yup." "Lazy." Julian said, "Okay. You can come work for me." Julian said, "Oh." Then he seemed to process it and looked slightly speechless. "You need a photographer?" Caleb replied lazily, "Adding one more mouth to feed won't bankrupt the Thorn Corporation." Julian smiled. "Oh, I wouldn't be so sure about that." Caleb's lips curved into a smirk. "How so?" Julian, curled up on the sofa, drew out his words, his voice deliberately low and seductive, carrying a hint of a tease through the phone line. "The beautiful, innocent photographer seduces the boss, drains him dry, and runs off with his money." Caleb narrowed his eyes thoughtfully, then sneered. "And on the way, he gets caught by the boss, who breaks both his legs and keeps him chained up at home like a dog." He paused, then smiled, unafraid. "Besides, the last time I interviewed, wasn't there someone who looked at me with a face that screamed, 'Rejected'?" That afternoon, on their way to dinner, as they pulled into the parking garage of Riverview Pavilion, Julian's father finally remembered the conversation that had been interrupted that morning. He finished his sentence in the car. "We're having dinner with your Uncle Leo and his son, Leo." Julian froze for a second. When he recovered, he realized there had been a massive misunderstanding. Not long after his dinner with Leo at the romantic restaurant, he had started dating Caleb. His father had never been one to meddle in his social life, let alone his private relationships, and was currently under the impression that his son had hit it off with old Leo's boy. 10 minutes later, the two families were sitting face to face in a private room. The misunderstanding quickly cleared up. Fortunately, Julian's father and old Leo were longtime friends, so there was no awkwardness. The matchmaking dinner seamlessly transitioned into a reunion. As the waiter brought the dishes, Julian's father and old Leo were already happily chatting over drinks. Julian sat next to Leo, his gaze sweeping over the exquisitely plated dishes, and made small talk. They hadn't seen each other since their last dinner, and the conversation eventually circled back to that meeting, even mentioning their encounter with Caleb on the street. Julian had intended to brush it off, but at the last moment, an important detail came to mind. He turned and asked casually how Leo knew Caleb. Leo explained briefly that his university had a partnership with the Thorn Corporation, and their professor had been the one to connect them. Julian looked puzzled. Your professor knew Caleb before that? Of course, Leo said. Professor Albright, my advisor, he was Mr. Thorn's undergraduate professor at the university. A look of astonishment crossed Julian's face. He stared into space, lost in thought, not even noticing when a waiter mistakenly served them the wrong main course. It was Leo who finally snapped him out of it by tapping his fingers on the table. You look surprised. Julian's expression returned to normal. I heard Caleb say he graduated from there, but I didn't believe it. He smiled, a flawless mask. So it was true. 1 second they were talking about Caleb, the next Julian found himself face to face with him, along with Leo's Professor Albright. He had just taken a bite when the waiter rushed in, apologizing profusely for mixing up the orders, his eyes landing on the main course Julian had just started eating. Julian got up to sort it out with him at the door, and Leo followed. A moment later, in the adjacent private room, they saw Caleb sitting with Professor Albright and his wife. The dish that should have been served to Caleb's table had been mistakenly sent to theirs. Julian and Caleb's eyes met, a clear smile already forming in his, but before he could speak, Professor Albright beat him to it. He smiled broadly, his gaze sweeping over Julian before landing on Leo. I asked you to join me for dinner this morning, but you said no. Turns out you already had plans. Professor, you've got it all wrong, Leo said with a helpless expression. This is my father's friend's son. The professor, whose memory was still sharp despite his impending retirement, immediately understood. Oh, he exclaimed with a smile. So this is the blind date your father set up for you. Caleb, who had been silently watching Julian, finally raised an eyebrow and interjected. Are you here with friends? He asked. Julian smiled at his words and walked over to Caleb's side. The man remained seated, but in front of the other three, he wrapped an arm around Julian's waist. He looked at the bewildered professor and said coolly, Professor Albright, I'd like to introduce you. This is my boyfriend. At the same time, in a blind spot hidden from the others, the hand that was supposed to be on his lower back had slipped down and given his behind a firm, unapologetic squeeze. The family reunion became a multi-person gathering, and Julian's father even got to meet his future son-in-law. The old man, prone to forgetfulness, vaguely recognized the handsome, almost aggressively striking face, sensing a faint familiarity in his sharp features, but couldn't place him. Fortunately, he was easygoing and soon got into a drinking contest with old Leo. On the other side, Leo was discussing his research with his advisor, leaving Caleb and Julian to settle their own accounts at the table. The man's chopsticks expertly avoided the tender fish and picked up a sliver of ginger, holding it to Julian's lips. His voice was a low threat. Julian, he said, are you having dinner with your blind date behind my back again? Julian ate the ginger without a change in expression, his eyes soft and innocent as he looked at him. I was wrong, he said. Caleb narrowed his eyes, half believing him. Are you sure? He asked. Julian nodded sincerely. Caleb seemed satisfied, a pleased smile on his lips. Julian, seeing this, relaxed his guard. Caleb's chopsticks moved again. A large piece of green onion was pressed against his lips. He held the onion in his mouth and sighed softly, mumbling, all men are the same. In front of others, he calls me by my nickname, but when it's just us, it's my full name. Caleb retorted without missing a beat, all men are the same because all wives are the same. The word wife made Julian freeze for a second. He blinked, then raised an eyebrow. What kind of wife? Caleb lifted his eyelids nonchalantly. The kind that needs to be disciplined every 3 days. Fine, Julian said, spitting out the onion and dropping his smile. Let's talk about something else. Caleb glanced at him. What? Julian asked with a smirk. How did you find out my nickname? Did Alex tell you? Caleb looked momentarily speechless. A few months ago, Shane was calling you that all the time. Did you think I was deaf? You have a good memory, Julian muttered, lowering his eyes in thought. Then he looked up and smiled. But have I told you the story behind my nickname? He rested his cheek on his hand and turned to look at Caleb intently. You know, my dad has some money, but he's not exactly cultured, right? When I was born, he thought a humble nickname would help me grow up healthy. So he just called me Birdie. But then he thought it sounded a bit like, well, you know. Caleb sneered. So they compromised and found a slightly nicer sounding character from the dictionary that was a homonym for bird. Julian's expression faltered for a second. Then he asked tentatively, you knew? Caleb glanced at him. Why wouldn't I? It's not that, Julian said with a smile, his tone light. I'm just curious how you knew. Did Shane tell you that too? But this time, the man didn't answer right away. He paused for a rare moment, a slight frown on his face. A strange look flickered in his dark eyes before it was swallowed by the amber depths, so quickly that Julian barely caught it. Then he heard Caleb's low, pleasant voice. Besides your childhood friend, who else would say it? A couple of days later, Julian's high school desk mate asked him out for a drink. They didn't go to a fancy club, but to a lively, stylish bar in the Riverside Bar District downtown. When they were in school, the bar district was only a 10-minute walk away. Julian would occasionally skip evening study hall to go to the internet cafe with friends, and sometimes they'd end up at a small bar at the end of the street. Over time, the owner even got to know them. Years later, when Julian stepped back into the area, the small corner bar had become the biggest name on the street, and the smiling, cigarette-smoking owner who used to offer them free drinks was long gone. The now mature, sharp-featured young man sat in a booth and waved him over. Julian sat down, and before he could even order, his friend slapped him on the shoulder heartily. Tonight's on me, he said, then pulled a bright red wedding invitation from his pocket and pushed it in front of him. Julian took it, opened it, and glanced at the bride's name, which seemed vaguely familiar. A moment later, he remembered. She was one of the pretty girls from their school that the boys were always talking about. Before he could even feel a pang of nostalgia for the days of skipping class and fighting, he heard his high school friend, cigarette in mouth, say with a laugh, "We haven't taken the wedding photos yet. Can't find the right photographer." Julian immediately understood and raised an eyebrow. "You want me to take your pictures? What's in it for me?" His friend pushed the drink menu away and said smoothly, "How about the most expensive drink here tonight?" Julian laughed. "Well, if you put it that way, I guess I'm free anytime." He then waved over a passing waiter and, without hesitation, ordered the most expensive drink. The waiter left to get it, but Julian didn't turn back right away. He held his position, his gaze traveling over the moving crowd and landing on a pair of intense eyes in a booth across the room. The next second, those eyes dropped guiltily, and their owner quickly turned away, hiding in the shadows. But from the faces of his friends, it was clear they were a group of college students. Being stared at in a bar was nothing unusual. Julian didn't pay it much mind and turned back to chat with his friend. Before he could finish a sentence, a shadow fell over their table. They both thought it was the waiter with their drinks, but when they turned, they saw two young college students. Just a moment ago, they had been laughing and joking with their friends in the booth behind them, and one of them had been surreptitiously watching him for a long time. Julian rested his chin on his hand and observed them coolly. The boy on the right nudged his friend, who seemed to snap out of a daze. His gaze focused and he stammered, addressing Julian's friend, "Excuse me, can I get your WeChat?" The girl's friend had his arm casually draped over her shoulder, but his eyes were narrowed, fixed on Julian's face. Julian followed his gaze, and the boy, who couldn't have been more than 20, flinched, hastily trying to hide his intentions. Julian's friend, having just given him a wedding invitation, naturally declined the request for his contact information. Julian got up to go to the restroom and saw the two students leave their table and return to their original seats. 2 minutes later, when he came back, he noticed that the group of students was now in a conflict with two large, muscular men. The music had just stopped for a moment, and the crowded bar fell silent, the atmosphere tense. But a fight didn't break out. The bar's security guards came over and dispersed the crowd, and the pulsating rock music started up again. Julian looked away, paying no more attention to what was happening behind him. 2 hours later, when they got up to leave, Julian glanced around and noticed that the college students were gone. He and his friends said their goodbyes at the door. Julian stuffed his hands in his pockets and started walking towards the end of the street to catch a cab. As he passed a narrow alleyway to the left of the bar, he heard the faint sounds of a scuffle carried on the wind. He paused, looked into the dark alley, and then slowly stepped into the shadows. He walked down the long, stone-paved path and stopped at a corner, looking in. In the pale moonlight, a group of agile young men were fighting with the two large men, their shadows merging into a single, monstrous, shifting black blotch on the stone wall. The two girls were huddled in a corner, terrified. They both looked up at him. As if sensing his presence, one of the young men rolled out of the brawl, his forehead bleeding but his handsome face undiminished. His eyes shone brightly in the moonlight, all the previous timidity from the bar gone. His voice was loud and clear. "Bro, give us a hand," he yelled. Julian leaned against the wall, arms crossed, and coughed lightly in the cold night air. "I called the cops 10 minutes ago," he announced. He then opened his phone's search engine, found a recording of a police siren, and pressed play. The shrill sound blared through the alley. The men's faces changed instantly. They quickly disengaged, threw out a few threats, and fled. Julian put his phone away and saw that the young man with the bleeding forehead was still sitting on the ground. Breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling, but his eyes were still sizing him up. He straightened up and smiled. "What, you want my number too?" The handsome young man seemed to be too busy catching his breath to speak. His lips parted in a long silence, but his eyes never left Julian's face. Julian belatedly realized that he didn't look like someone who wanted to get his number. He looked like he recognized him. He frowned and mentally searched his memories, but came up with nothing. Just then, the boy's phone rang, pulling him back to the present. Julian clearly saw him answer the phone and say a dry "bro." The person on the other end said something, and he listened for a moment, his expression turning strange, but he still answered obediently. "I'm in the alley next to the bar." As he said this, he instinctively raised his head and looked at Julian again. 2 minutes later, the sound of steady footsteps approached from the mouth of the alley. Before the person appeared, a familiar low voice echoed through the space. "Sam, you've grown some balls, haven't you? Fighting outside a bar?" Everyone turned at the sound. A tall, slender shadow danced on the old, dark green wall. The man rounded the corner behind Julian. His gaze first landed on Julian, a look of surprise on his face, followed by a click of his tongue. Then he glanced at the disheveled scene behind him and said with a cool, mocking tone, "Sam, you've got a lot of nerve, picking a fight with your brother-in-law." Sam, who was still trying to catch his breath, looked as if he'd heard something unbelievable, his expression a mixture of shock and confusion. After sending the other students off in a cab, Sam got into Caleb's car. Caleb turned to Julian and asked if he wanted to go to his place or go home. "Home," Julian said, looking up from his phone. He gave Caleb his address, then glanced at Sam in the rearview mirror, his expression surprised. "You have a brother?" Caleb, keeping his eyes on the road, said, "Not a real one." Julian, remembering the quick-witted way Sam had called out to him in the alley, glanced in the rearview mirror again and saw him pouting at Caleb's words, a look of silent rebellion on his face. He couldn't help but smile. He was now certain that Caleb's brother recognized him, but he fell into a thoughtful silence. He had never seen Caleb's brother before, so where had Sam seen him? Caleb, noticing Julian's repeated glances in the rearview mirror, looked thoughtful. "You two know each other?" Before Julian could shake his head, Sam, in the back seat, blurted out, "No." Caleb's expression was unreadable. "If you don't know each other, how did you run into each other?" "Just a coincidence," Sam mumbled, trying to make himself small and quickly changing the subject. Bro, I'm going back to the dorm tonight. Not happening, Caleb said flatly. Sam moved forward, trying to explain. Bro, I didn't fight him. I was fighting someone else and wanted to ask for his help. Do you think I can't tell if you two fought? The man sneered, then turned his taunts on Julian. If you had fought Sam, do you think you'd be sitting here with your face intact? Julian coughed lightly, not bothering to argue. Caleb was right. He had never been much of a fighter, not even as a kid. He had lost this round, but he quickly tried to regain some ground. I may not be a fighter, he said, his eyes narrowing meaningfully, but how do you know that? We've never fought. Caleb's voice faltered for a second. He didn't answer. Julian, smiling, pressed on. Don't tell me my childhood friend told you that too. Just then, the light turned red, and the car stopped. Julian leaned over, one hand on the man's shoulder. Caleb, when did you and my friend get so close? Caleb pushed his hand away, his face blank. I don't know that you can't fight. He then subtly hid the strange look in his eyes and added with a snort. I just wanted to tell you that Sam has never lost a fight when he's on his own. But now I know. If you hadn't said anything, I might have gone easy on you in a fight. But you don't even know how to fight. Caleb paused, then smiled coolly. So if you get into trouble, you'll just have to lie down and let me deal with you. In the silence, as the light turned green, Sam, who hadn't been able to get a word in, spoke up again. Bro, our school's north gate is just on the right. He then watched in dismay as the car sped straight through the intersection. Caleb's voice was stern. I told you not to fight again. Did my words go in one ear and out the other? Sam was so angry he wanted to roll his eyes. Why can you fight but I can't? Caleb lifted his eyelids. At least I can win. Getting beaten up by someone and then shamelessly asking for backup, he slumped back in his seat, defeated. After scolding Sam, Caleb turned to Julian. You don't know Sam, but you helped him? Julian, unsure of the implication behind the question, didn't answer right away. But the other man didn't seem to expect an immediate response. He just smiled a little and asked when Julian had become such a busybody. Julian was speechless. He was about to say something when Caleb cut him off. If you're gonna say you thought he looked like me, that's a load of crap, and I won't believe it. After all, we don't have the same mother or father. My mother is American. He smiled slowly. I don't know him, but your brother was staring at me in the bar all night. I thought he knew me, so I helped him out. He met Caleb's gaze in the rearview mirror and held up his hands in a gesture of surrender. I swear I'm not gay. You're not gay? Caleb sneered. Then why were you staring at him? Sam lowered his head, stammering, unable to answer. Julian's gaze shifted between Caleb and Sam. To an outsider, it would seem Caleb was angry at Julian, but he knew it was only half true. He leaned his head against the seat, his eyes half closed, lost in thought. The car fell silent, each of the three men lost in their own thoughts. In the end, it was Sam who couldn't take the silence anymore. He stealthily looked up at the two in front. Though he didn't have the same insight as the people involved, he sensed that his brother's fixation on him wasn't just out of annoyance. There was another reason. But as an outsider, he couldn't figure out what Caleb was thinking. He only vaguely perceived an invisible thread inside his brother, a thread that Julian had somehow grasped and was now slowly, silently pulling taut. Perhaps the silence lasted too long, or perhaps Julian had been leaning against the seat for too long. A few moments later, his eyelids drooped completely, and his jumbled thoughts were swallowed by the darkness. He couldn't hear anything, and he certainly didn't hear, long after he had fallen asleep, Sam's hesitant, repeated attempts to speak, before he finally asked softly, Bro, are you two, for real? Caleb slammed on the brakes, his body lurching forward with the sudden stop. He turned to his brother, his brow furrowed in irritation. The young man, startled, snapped back to reality, his throat tightening. He quickly swallowed the word he had been about to say, as if forcing it back down, before shakily finishing his sentence. Together? Caleb didn't speak, his gaze sharp and direct. Sam sat there rigidly, his heart pounding, as if Caleb's stare would pierce through him and pull the unspoken word from his gut. But after a long moment, the man's expression softened slightly. If it wasn't real, would it be fake? He asked. Just then, Julian was shaken awake. He opened his sleepy eyes, looked out at the night, and murmured, "Are we here?" Caleb clicked his tongue and pinched his cheek. "You're still half asleep." Julian's eyes cleared. After saying goodbye to the others in the car, he unbuckled his seatbelt and got out. As he was closing the door, he saw Sam in the back seat. He paused, then walked around the front of the car to the driver's side window. Caleb lowered it. "Oh, good night, Kish." Julian smiled and leaned in, resting his hands on the window frame, and kissed Caleb on the cheek. The man's eyes darkened as he turned his head. One hand went over Julian's head to rest on the roof of the car, the other cupped his face. And he tilted his chin up, capturing his lips in a deep kiss, oblivious to anyone else. A moment later, Caleb pulled back, his hands still on Julian's face. His warm, rough thumb wiped away a trace of saliva from the corner of his mouth. But Julian didn't move away. His lips parted, his warm breath ghosting over Caleb's face. He lowered his eyes, his voice a soft murmur. "You wanted to know why your brother was staring at me in the bar? I don't know him, and he doesn't really know me." He paused, his tone now a strange mixture of confusion and certainty. "But he's definitely seen me before." It wasn't strange that Sam had seen Julian before. Just as they had coincidentally met in the bar that night, Sam could have seen him in a shopping mall or a restaurant on any given day. Memory is far less reliable than a written record. If someone tells you today that they like cilantro, tomorrow you might remember that another person likes cilantro, and the first person actually likes chives. Or the intersections and street corners you've walked in your dreams might, over time, seep into your waking memories. When the line between dream and reality blurs, you can no longer tell them apart. Coincidences of real-life encounters and memory are common. What was unusual was the expression on Sam's face when he talked about the coincidence. Caleb frowned, staring silently at Julian's back for a long moment before his expression returned to normal. He glanced at Sam in the back seat, who was fidgeting nervously. Compared to Julian, the 20-something Sam was an open book. Even if Julian hadn't said anything, Caleb could tell that Sam had seen him before, and that it had something to do with him. Caleb drove back to the family estate. Sam scrambled out of the car, a strained smile on his face as he waved to Caleb in the driver's seat. "Drive safe," he said. But before he could finish, he saw Caleb turn off the engine and get out too. Worried that Caleb would question him about Julian, he quickly asked, "Bro, you're not going back to your place tonight?" Caleb glanced at him. "No." Sam said, "Oh," and started to run towards the villa, explaining that he had class in the morning and needed to shower and sleep. He had only taken 2 steps when the back of his collar was yanked tight. Caleb pulled him back, his voice cool. "Not so fast. I have something important to ask you." Sam's back went rigid. He was dragged, heart pounding, to the living room sofa, where he sat with his head down, staring at the floor, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end under the other man's scrutinizing gaze. It was even more terrifying than being caught doing something wrong by his stern uncle. At the thought, Sam couldn't help but remember last year, at the end of the term, after his English exam. He had been picked up by the driver and brought to the estate. At lunch, the sun was bright, and the family's large dog was frolicking in the yard outside the French windows. Sam had wiped his mouth, left the table, gone upstairs, drawn the curtains, and fallen into a deep sleep. When he woke up, it was dark and stormy outside, the rain pounding against the window like a drum. He had gotten out of bed, puzzled, and opened the door. As he passed his uncle's study, he saw that the door was ajar. A soft white light from the desk lamp illuminated the room. The window opposite the desk was half open, and the wind and rain were blowing in, making the papers on the desk rustle. But the room was empty. Sam hesitated, then looked around. Seeing no one, he tiptoed inside.